So thank you very much, sir, for that very insightful personal impressions and perspective on what is going on in the India-Sweden context and also in domestic context. Honorable Minister has agreed to take a few questions. So if you have some questions that you would wish to ask the Honorable Minister, please raise your hands. Briefly introduce yourself, and if you could keep the questions short. Okay.
I'm Shilpa Subarna. I've been following you greatly. Like a fanboy, I follow you. I'm addicted to the videos. One thing very impressive about you is you follow yourself so calm and composed. You handle extreme, subtle but yet strong, witty yet very politically correct. So how do you do it, sir? Is it... Is it, I mean, it's not a skill that can be learned, or it's a lifestyle or yoga, meditation? What is it, sir?
No. Well, look, to be honest, I think it's not that I don't get excitable. It is not that, we're all human, okay? And it depends. There are issues which can get me going, I assure you. But by and large, if you have a lifetime of actually interacting with people, of explaining to people, and perhaps, some of it may be diplomatic training, you could say, which is, don't let them provoke you, but don't let them push you, So I would say maybe part instinct, part experience. But again, look, what I would say this as an example. Today we are becoming, we're becoming bigger in India. Okay, we are the 5th largest economy. Our weight, our influence, our reach, our opinions, all this count for more. Now, when that happens, it's not always that everybody would embrace it warmly. People will contest it. There will be, you can have people who may feel, this country or this person, in the past they always listened to us. Now why are they behaving differently? I mean, they could have that. So the rise of any country is always a challenge. And when you are challenged, you have to handle it in a way in which you respond, but you don't necessarily get provoked. I think that's the fine line. So I try my best. Occasionally, maybe, but I try my best.
No, sir, you do excellent. Thank you.
Thank you. My name is Nalini Bonnier. I'm a managing director at a global investment bank here in Sweden. It's called BNP Paribas. And by chance, I'm actually also the first Indian girl who came to Sweden at the age of 2 and who is still living here. So I came here in 1964 with my parents. My father was a nuclear physicist. He came here on a research scholarship, and he became a Swedish representative to the International Research Center CERN in Geneva as an Indian citizen. So my question to you is, how do you see the future of the UN Security Council, given the challenges in maintaining peace? And do you also see a potential for India to become a permanent member, given that India is the most populous nation in the world? Thank you.
Ambassador, if I may make a suggestion, could I take about 3-4 questions, then everybody will get a chance. Yeah.
I'll come to this side. Maybe.
Hello, sir. I'm a big fan of you. First, I should say that. Thank you so much for honoring us being here. My question is, sir, the geopolitical situation and the political clout right now is changing. And as you can understand, Sweden, which has been a peace-loving country and has a big history like India, now NATO has come in and there is a lot of things changing due to the geopolitical situation. So as Honorable External Affairs Minister for India right now, what is the biggest challenge you see when it comes to the geopolitical situation right now? Considering NATO and the war that's going on, what is the big challenge that we are facing? Thank you so much.
Thank you. Somebody from, yeah, Richard. Yeah.
Hello. Yeah. Hello, I'm Omkar from Chalmers, representing the Indian group from Chalmers. I would like to make 2 points. First of all, you're such a great speaker. The way you answer the questions is really good. And the second thing is, we all know that next year we have the central elections coming up. And the awareness among the Indians abroad that we can cast a vote from here is very less. So can something be made wherein we have been made more aware about we can register for Form 6 and cast a vote from here, which would be really good for us. And the second thing being, I see that there's a lot of collaboration between automotive companies such as the Volvo Trucks and GKN from Sweden and back in India. And being a student in the aerospace sector, can we hope something happening in the near future wherein electric aviation, which is happening very good here, can we see some collaboration taking place in India as well in the future? Thank you.
I'll take one more.
One more from this side. Yeah.
Hello. So my name is Peter, and first of all, thank you, Shri Dr. Jaishankar, for coming to Sweden, and it's such a great pleasure to have, a foreign minister from such a big country like India here. So my question is that since India is already the most populous country in the world, it was also probably also have the highest GDP in the world and surpassing countries such as USA and much of the West. So my question to you is, do you think also that the Indian culture will become more prominent in the West? That, for example, in the future, when we think of fast food, we think of pani puri instead of hamburger. That radios here would start to play Bollywood music, and that H&M T-shirts would have New Delhi printed on instead of New York. Thank you, sir.
Let me start with the UN Security Council question. The UN, I think everybody will remember, was designed in the 1940s. At a time when, though India was an original signatory to the Charter, but India was not an independent country. And at that time, the 5 countries who are still today permanent members of the Security Council, they kind of selected themselves, you could say. Now, the problem today is, like any institution, those who are previous beneficiaries are resistant to that change, which they feel would in some way dilute their positions of privilege. Now, some of them may be more so, some of them less so. I think the wiser ones will say, okay, life is changing, let me change with it. It's useful for us to have a country like India. There would be others who may not oppose us openly, but effectively through their actions and policy ensure that the status quo is maintained. For almost now 20 years, there has been a persistent effort to find a way of reforming the UN. And there are today 190 something countries who are members of the UN. Now you would imagine, you can ask yourself, how hard can it be? Okay, if there are 190 countries, why don't they all sit in a room and sit down and thrash it out? But as Ambassador would tell you, he's worked in the United Nations. What happens is, the obstructions and the maneuvers begin. So even sitting in the room to discuss it itself is a challenge, So this, quite honestly, is one, it's not just a challenge for India, because the fact is, There is today no African country as a permanent member. There is no Latin American country. So what happens is, if you have any large body, it could be body of nations, body of people, if the leadership, the decision making is not representative of the membership. So it's like a shareholding. If the shareholders of a company feel that the company management is not representative of the shareholding, you're going to have problems. Now, at this time, you can actually see that with each passing year, the effectiveness of the UN has actually come under question. So, even for the good of the UN, it is. So, I'm not even taking an Indian viewpoint. I mean, I would say globally, fairness, effectiveness would dictate that there is reform. For the good of the UN, there should be reform. But, it will be a kind of a tussle between the reformists and those who are obstructionists. But I'm very confident that, look, with each passing year, I've seen, the sentiment for reform grow stronger. So when it will happen, I can't say. But I can say the needle is moving in the direction of reform. That I can certainly assert. Regarding the geopolitical challenge issue, look how the world looks depends in many ways where you look at it. I can imagine today. I mean, I've seen in the last. Yesterday, today, the people I met, I mean, here obviously right now, the Ukraine conflict is the most important event. It's understandable because it's a very proximate region. Now, if you go, let us say, to Asia or to Latin America, I was there 2 weeks ago, it's not like they are unaware of the seriousness of it. It is that it's manifested in their lives in a very different way. So if you ask, say in Africa today, what is it which is really like you consider the life and death issue? People will tell you, look, debt is a big issue. We don't have the money to do education, health. We are actually cutting back in many ways. Far from progressing, we are actually in some ways regressing. There will be places where, even the Ukraine conflict has expressed itself in food shortage. A large part of Africa, Middle East was actually importing food, and their food chains have been disrupted. There are countries who have found that their energy bills have shot up, and in some ways it's become unaffordable for a country. There would be places where actually people will say, fertilizer supply, because remember, Russia is one of the biggest, probably the biggest exporter of fertilizer, that has been affected. So one part of it is we are today in a very globalized existence, and a disruptive event somewhere will actually not just affect that immediate region. That would have happened 25 years ago. Distant parts would not have felt it the way that they are doing today. Now, once you accept that, I would say look at the disruptions across, what could be the source of disruptions. We spoke about COVID. Think how much COVID actually disrupted the world. Not only by the health consequences of COVID, the economic consequences, the mobility consequences, the supply chain consequences. I mean, during the lockdown, when we had the lockdown in 2020, one of the regions which was very, very anxious at the time of lockdown was actually the Gulf, because most of us don't readily realize it. Every day, there is food shipment moving out of India to the Gulf. They are heavily dependent on us for actually their food supplies. So they were very worried that actually the flow of food would get disrupted. And we actually made an exceptional effort at that time to ensure that it didn't happen. So one part of it, as I said, is this whole set of disruptive events. It could be pandemic, it could be climate events. I mean, again, we think of global warming, but look at the regularity and the growing intensity of climate events. That climate events are getting stronger, more catastrophic in their consequences, and they will be disruptive as well. You had countries where there are massive floods, enormous heat waves, right? Big cyclones. We're seeing one right now near Bangladesh. And if you measure them against how it happened 10 years ago, 20 years ago, 50 years ago, no question that they're all getting much more severe. So this kind of disruptive is one issue. We don't think of it as geopolitical, but it is actually. The second is the nature today of the global economy, that if production is not dispersed, that if there's a concentration in one area, it's actually a big risk. It could be a risk from any of these disruptive factors. The third is technology. That again, technology is seen by people as neutral. Technology is actually very, very strategic. That we are moving to a world. There are a lot of you demographically or professionally would know very much more about it than I do. We are moving into actually a world where data, artificial intelligence, these are actually going to be the new expressions of power. So I think a part of what is happening in my profession is we are at a cusp where there is a kind of I would say the factors, there's a change almost in the manner in which we contemplate our profession. That how do nations, what is the competition between nations, who is powerful, who is less powerful, who is influential, how do they become so, all that is today changing. Regarding your points, I think it's a very valid point. And on the bit you mentioned about the election, but on the aviation, look, in India, again, we are today encouraging private sector growth, not just in defense, in different aspects of aviation, including civil aviation. And you are actually seeing some very interesting developments, that there are private companies today who are confident enough and who got the contracts to actually try and make aircraft in India. My sense is actually India could be poised, because I still use that word because I think we are setting in place the policies. We now have to make sure we get that kind of international traction. We could be poised to actually emerge as a major manufacturing hub. And not just as a manufacturing hub, but a geography where a large part of the world trusts us. Because that's a very important word today in business and in technology, that you need trusted partners. You need, and it's not so much an IP issue. It's a trust, because the application of that technology and how you deploy it is today a matter of great sensitivity. I think today India can emerge as a hub for trusted technology development. It can be really a center for expanded design engineering. Indian businesses, I think, are kind of poised today to grow in areas where previously they have been very hesitant. And I think there are opportunities here, and it's important, as I said, that Indians who have a specialization, who have some knowledge of this, explain that to people in Sweden. Because often people's image of us may be 5 years old, 10 years old, and believe me, a lot of things are changing. So it would be very helpful if people like you spread the word. These are the changes which are happening in India. the question about the observations about Indian culture. I don't know if you follow Hindi, but there is a term which says "Aapke muh mein ghee shakkar." The meaning, we very sort of welcome in many ways what you say, may it come true, but I actually can see this globalization of Indian culture happening. And it's happening for a variety of factors. One, of course, is because, of the spread of the diaspora. The second is we ourselves, I think, are much more confidently expressing it. It's important we try to find ways of making it more universal. And one very good example of that is actually this initiative which started in 2015 of celebrating the International Day of Yoga. When started, Prime Minister spoke about it in September of 2014. He had come to the US at that time. I must say, in all honesty, none of us actually could even imagine it would catch on the way it does now. I mean, there is not a country in the world where that enthusiasm for yoga is not there. Perhaps it was there, it may have been dormant, we may have done something to awaken it and take it to a new level. But there are other areas, it could be music, it could be cinema, the power of culture. And I think that's a strength of India. It's a strength of India which we have not brought into play in the manner in which we should. And I hope people like you, if you can be so enthusiastic, I'm sure everybody else will join you in that regard. I'll take one more. I'll take one round more. One round, or four questions.
So I'm Dr. Sanjeevi. I'm also Pravasi Bharasya Samman Awardee. I've been in Sweden now for 33 years. My question is about China. China is one of the biggest trading partners for India. But at the same time, we are being pressured by China in all sides. One, by taking all the countries surrounding India into a debt trap. That's one thing. Second, all the terrorists that India want to identify are all being blocked at the United Nations by China from being named as terrorists. So there is a past, there is a present, and we are talking about climate wars that are going to happen in the future, where one can manipulate the clouds from not bringing the rain and resulting in some of the desertification and things like that. So with so much happening, it's extremely tough job, I think, for you in balancing the trade on one side and also increasing the security for India on the other side. How do you envision that we will move forward with China in the future?
Okay.
Anybody from this side?
Hi. We have the same alma mater. My name is Samir Kalra. I studied at AFCS, so we're really proud of what you do for the school.
Right.
Fantastic, absolutely.
Thank you.
On behalf of everyone who has passed out from the school. I head the marine division of Alfa Laval, one of the 300 companies you alluded to in your talk. And my question to you is, you mentioned climate a couple of times, maybe more than that during your interaction today. But if you see India's ambition around net zero, it significantly lacks the global ambition in terms of where we would like to be. And you also mentioned the fact that our growth will be greener down the line. We hear about what we are doing around hydrogens and stuff like that. But do you see a risk that if we are not a bit more ambitious on our target around climate, in terms of the technology development, we may actually be left behind in the process? And climate is a global, it's something that impacts all of us. So it's not the emissions only come up in India.
Thank you. Somebody from this side. Richard.
Hello, sir. My name is Kaushik. First of all, thank you very much for coming to Sweden. Really appreciate this and the honor of being in here in this presence. I'm born in Gujarat. I've been living in Sweden for 43 years now, so I'm brought up here. I'm like one of those 50-50 people. When I'm in Sweden, I feel Indian, and when I go to India, I feel Swedish. So I don't have any...
But you feel Gujarati all the time.
I'm Gujarati all the way. Tepla, kakra, you name it. So I actually don't have a question. I just want to say big thanks. Because when I grew up in Sweden, when we grew up, we saw being Indian, we were always looked upon as some sort of a third-class people, frankly speaking. I mean, I've seen this, I've felt it from inside. You know that? They see us as lower-standing people, like undeveloped and maybe uneducated at times, poor. But then I've seen the shift throughout. And maybe it happens as well because I have grown myself, got an education, I'm stronger, I see how I work. But I've seen how the Indian government has done this, the old governments, I'm not saying only this government, but previously. And I'm really thankful, and I just want to say big thanks for this because we are so proud now to be Indians in these contexts, you know. So just want to say big thanks for that.
Okay.
Thank you.
One more.
This one? Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Hello. So here I'm not going to take about some political questions or something, but as a representative of youths from India and as well as in Sweden, came here to study my master's and now working here for 3 years now. So what would be your advice or thoughts where us youngsters representing India and also working in Europe would like to have a mindset in terms of future taking India as a, being as a rep from India and also continuing the growth towards Europe. So how would you like to motivate or give us some advice?
Sure. Let me start with the China question. You see, why today does India, not only India, but India imports so much from China? In part, I would argue because when we embarked on reform in 1991-92, we opened up our economy. We should have done that. I mean, nobody today disputes that reform was necessary. But what we did not do at that time and the succeeding years was the way in which, let us say, China or a Japan or a Korea built up their industry. We did not give that kind of encouragement and support to manufacturing in India. Now, what it did was, it actually put Indian industry, especially small industry, very much at disadvantage. Because on the one hand, we were exposing them to the world, but we were exposing them to economies where, in a sense, there are a lot of non-market factors, subsidies at play, the scale was very different. And so if you look back at the last 3 decades, actually, this has been a very persistent complaint in the Indian business community, especially the small business community. So how today to motivate and encourage revival of manufacturing? This is something which is very important, because if our own businesses, if they prefer to source from China rather than from Indian companies, how does the chain get built? Now, you will not see that, say, in East Asia. Japanese companies will source from Japanese companies. Korean companies will source from Korean companies. So, a large, some of it is like the economic factors. Some of it is making infrastructure. I mean, one of the reasons why we are making this big push in infrastructure is, if our infrastructure is not competitive, our economy cannot be competitive, because you are it's not only convenience of people. You are actually disadvantaging production in India with an inefficient infrastructure. So there are a whole set of changes which need to be done to encourage manufacturing. But we've had, debates in India. Frankly, I don't want to be political abroad, but we have not always seen consistent support for industry and for manufacturing in India. But there is also the motivational factor. Today, if you look at the messaging of the Prime Minister, when he keeps saying Atmanirbhar Bharat, when he says vocal for local, when he tells us, look, go buy, make in India, give preference to make in India. Even when it comes to even the government of India was often not treating Indian industry as the natural place to go and buy its products. So I would say a lot of it is economics, a big part of it is policy, there's a lot of infrastructure, but there's also that sense of having pride in being Indian, of supporting your own, of wanting your own companies to come up. That requires a certain, I would say, collective mindset. That's one of the changes which we are trying to bring about. It will be, it will be hard because, China has today accounts for a very large part of global manufacturing. But I feel today that after COVID, after the disruptions that we speak about, climate, Ukraine, etc., there is a sense in the world that there must be more sources of production. And we are trying to position ourselves and trying to capture that sentiment and tell global companies saying, look, why don't you also look at India? But I have to earn that business. I can't just tell people come to India and not sort of be attractive enough or efficient enough to do that. I think this is today for us one of the big challenges, but certainly it's something we would like to go down that direction. On the net zero and are we being less ambitious? Look, I was with the Prime Minister in Glasgow when he made that commitment. And there was a very, very intense debate we had in the whole run-up to Glasgow. First of all, to ask a society at $2,000 per capita income to even make a commitment is itself a huge ask. Where in the world at $2,000 has a society made that kind of commitment? So I think, we should actually today look at, we should not, you cannot equate India and the timelines of India and the growth path of India with countries whose per capita income are 5 times or 10 times or 20 times what is that of India. China's per capita income today is 4.5 times ours. And look at where they have pegged it. So now it's possible that, given the enormous pace of technological change, that a lot of these debates may be overtaken by options whose effectiveness we do not know today. The last 10 years have been a huge surprise for all of us. So maybe the next 10 years would be an even bigger surprise. So, but we felt on balance because it's, when you look at these big global debates, it's important not to be pressurized or, in a sense, pushed to make decisions. We are still very much a nation of small producers. We are very employment sensitive. It's very easy, in Europe, for example, has a very, I would say, almost a theological opposition to coal. But yes, they can have it. Their income levels allow it. They had other sources. When we were in Glasgow, everybody was against coal because they're all busy importing Russian gas. So, but now, when you look at the challenges that are faced, and I am not unsympathetic to the challenges, but you see, when at moments of stress, now a lot of people have fallen back to what they had also discarded earlier. So I don't think we have fallen short. In fact, I feel that under the circumstances, this was actually it was quite a big commitment which was made. I think it was important to make that commitment because you need to have some target to motivate people. If you had no target at all, it's not in human nature to drive yourself to do that. But I'm very confident, when I see what's happened on the digital side, I'm very confident India will also surprise itself when it comes to green technologies, that we will adapt, we will embrace. In many ways, there will be a kind of leapfrogging of Indian industry and Indian economy in ways in which we may not today fully anticipate it. But there is, people again have reduced it to a kind of a zero emissions issue. I think it's much bigger than that also. It's important. There are lifestyle issues and there are issues, by the way, of keeping promises. One of the problems through in this whole climate debate is, every climate conference is like Groundhog Day. The same guys come, make the same promises, and it's like, so. The reality is that the kind of resources which were promised, there's not even a I don't want to say pretense, but a modicum of delivering on that. Those are also genuine challenges. I think the other two questions or observations in a way are kind of connected. You spoke about how the standing of Indians has improved. Look, I share this. I first set out of India 44 years ago, 1979. I first came to Europe in 1981. It was a period when our resources were less, our standing was less, maybe our capabilities were less. We have, one part of it is, what we say, things like our economy has grown, etc. But the reality is the perception of India and Indians in the world, that has undergone a big change. That we have developed a kind of a collective sense today of people who embraced education, who embraced technology, who by the way, when I was ambassador in the US, I once had a member of Congress, a very a tough guy from Texas, who's a judge. And he actually told me, he said, I like Indians because I've never seen them on the wrong side of the bench. He was from a legal bench. So look, that Indian who follows the rules, whose work ethic is strong, whose family values are good, this is actually our collective persona. So we are seen today as really contributing citizens, as assets. People don't see us, wherever Indians are, they are not seen as a burden on the society which they are. They are seen actually as an asset. That's why when I said, all you guys make my job that much easier. That it was part of what you're saying. And to the young gentleman there, I would say, look, this is an era of mobility. This is an era of mobility. It will be increasingly one of more and more. I can see a lot of professions where the Indian participation in it will get stronger with the passage of time. Already you can see it. Any of you travel in any airline today, it doesn't have to be an airline owned by India. It is very likely you will see a crew member who's Indian. You go to any hotel in the world today, very likely you will see somebody there who's Indian. So the global service industry, the global tech industry, as I said, look, the demographics work for us. It's our challenge to empower the demographics, make it employable, make it, make that talent and skill deployable, relevant, and that is where people like you come in. And I feel that era where we say, am I at home and is it good to go abroad or bad to go abroad? I think that's old kind of thinking. I think younger people like you are just going to go in and out depending on where the opportunities are. And that's really a different kind of world, to my mind a better kind of world, which all of you are entering. So I count on people like you to take our country forward. I think we'll stop here.